healthcare delivery market. Glenwood was run by a company called Steward Health Group, an operator, for a number of years until its recent bankruptcy in 2024. The hospital is currently operated by American Healthcare Systems, the current operator of that facility. The facility itself and the assets are owned by a publicly traded REIT called Medical Properties Trust. If you look at what has transpired over the last couple of years, it seems to be a series of reoccurring issues of having unstable and financially unviable operators operate those facilities. Medical Properties Trust is a real estate investment trust, as I understand, that owns over 400 hospitals across the United States, including facilities in Louisiana. They may also have other assets in Louisiana, but I don't think it's a majority or more hospitals, just other real estate assets. Their business model, as I appreciate it, involves purchasing hospital real estate and leasing it back to operators at higher rates. This approach has led to an unsustainable financial burden on what seems to be these hospital operators, contributing to a cycle of instability and, in some cases, bankruptcy, with the Steward Health Group as an example. Notably, Steward was one of the largest for-profit private hospital systems in the U.S. I mentioned before a $6.6 billion long-term rent obligation to Medical Properties Trust. House Bill 317, though, seeks to disrupt or at least slow down the practice of landlords like Medical Properties Trust when they cannot extract, or preventing them from extracting, excessive rents without bearing some responsibility for the hospitals that they own. Part of this should be done through the underwriting process. It was in the securities business years ago, and typically if you look at REITs, they need to have viable underwriting standards when assessing their operators that are in these facilities. Well, we continue to see non-viability of the healthcare asset operator, and how they haven't been held accountable through the Securities and Exchange Commission is a bit odd to me. But with that being said, what 317 does is it creates necessary steps to protect that healthcare infrastructure and accountability. Now, I want to give you a couple of pieces of narratives. 2 years ago, when Steward was going under, they eliminated labor and delivery. They eliminated other service lines within the hospital. You started to hear chatter within the physicians and the medical market that they were wary of taking their patients to this facility because of lack of supplies, lack of systems, broken MRIs, broken elevators, and other conditions within the hospital. I notified the Department of Health at the time under the previous administration, and they said there was nothing they could do because it was privately owned. In November, I believe, of 2023, after a series of consultations with LDR, the Department of Health, and their executive council, they finally went in and did inspections. The hospital was put on medical jeopardy sometime later, and after numerous jeopardy issues with the hospital, I finally held an oversight hearing in which the Health and Welfare Committee had testimony from their interim president, John Turton. John Turton, through that testimony, said on the record that they killed and or maimed patients because of their malfeasance, that they hurt patients because they didn't provide adequate financial resources for supplies and other things. Since then, Steward ownership or operating entity has now been passed on to American Healthcare Systems. As I appreciate it, some time after that looked like it was going to happen, I did a personal inquiry. I went on the website. There was an 800 number, and there was an email address, info@whatever the name of their company was. I called the number. That 800 number went to a voicemail that then went to messages are full. Thought that was odd, this being a dynamic healthcare system that was taking over operations, so I shot an email to the info@whatever the name of the healthcare system was. That night at 8:30, I get a phone call from Michael Sarin, Facile Gill, and some other official on their board, randomly in the middle of the night. I told them, I said, I'm excited that there's a new operator coming in. I want to see better things for Glenwood. They went on to tell me that they were optimistic too and look forward to running the organization. I immediately asked, what will you do to remedy the tens of millions of dollars in deferred maintenance on the facility? They said, and I quote, "We don't have to worry about that. Medical Properties Trust is taking care of that." I also asked, I said, well, REITs traditionally don't reinvest cash. It's part of the securities law that it's typically the operator has to make upgrades. They said, no, don't worry about that. We have that under control. So they've obviously talked to Medical Properties Trust and have a path forward. Also from that call, some other odd and disturbing communication. Well, all that being said, I got off the call with them and said, look, if you do the right thing, I'll be your biggest supporter. If you do the wrong thing, I'll do everything I can to ensure that hospital is stable going forward, which leads me to today. I had the opportunity, by an invitation from Senator Cassidy, to testify before the Senate Health and Welfare Committee in Congress about the Steward mishaps. I got to hear from other healthcare professionals around the United States that the same abuse with these hospital assets is happening, not just in West Monroe, Louisiana, but all across the nation. Again, reason for House Bill 317, putting teeth into those that own a hospital asset who are unwilling to do the right thing and underwrite appropriate operators for these facilities. Also, some other things from the testimony that happened in the House here. There was a gentleman that would not or refused to testify. His name was Josh Putter. He was a steward, legal counsel, or executive. That same executive is now on LinkedIn, the regional president of American Healthcare Systems. All they're doing is shuffling executives from one company to the other. All they're doing is continuing to collude and operate with a healthcare asset owner and defunct or irregularly operating entities. I want to give you a couple pieces of testimonial that I get from people that work in the hospital. And I want to be clear with the people that work in the hospital. We have extraordinary healthcare professionals locally in West Monroe. We have extraordinary local leadership that are trying to do the right thing in a tenuous situation. When they don't have enough syringes or IVs and they're shuffling around from department to department, that is not right. That is not fair. They've been on medical jeopardy numerous times because of these issues. Here are the set of testimony from friends that are actually working in the hospital today. They could not be here, but I have to tell you what they said. One individual said, when HSA took over, it got better for a little bit. But then credit holds started happening on payments again. Central Supply can't get the stuff that they need to order. Next quote, patients get stuck twice because of iStat cartridges are not available. I don't know what an iStat cartridge is, but it's obviously something when you go from one department to the next, you get stuck. You don't have to get stuck but once if you have these things. Next quote, at one point, we told we would have no urinals and no catheter syringes and saline flushes in the warehouse. These are basic supplies that hospitals should have. 4 department managers have resigned and moved on because there's no betterment of work conditions between Steward and HSA. Financial supply issues seem to escalate and coincide with the restart of lease payments from HSA, I believe in March, over their grace period. Nearly mirrors the same image of physical state and building was under a Steward. Now, they tried to make some improvements, mow some grass, and do some things. I walked in the hospital 4 weeks ago in the main entrance. There was no one at security. There was no one at check-in. I walked the halls on the bottom floor for 15 minutes. All I saw was a patient get off an elevator and walk out the door. Not a single staff member, not a single set of security measures. As it relates to payment of vendors and operations, the internal employee says day-to-day operations mirror Steward to HSA. Employee name tags still say Steward. They were told to cover them with tape because they couldn't afford to buy new ones. Front signs still say Steward. Floors and wards closed and sitting empty under Steward, still empty. Folks, all I want is a little bit of accountability for the person that owns the asset. I have a shell of a hospital that is sitting there that was a vibrant hospital with great, vibrant employees. People call me crying that they've had to take jobs in other places because they cannot continue to serve the standard of care that they think is fair in that facility. Also, Dr. Abraham's here, and I asked him to be here because from a regulatory standpoint, he sees, and with the medical jeopardy and those other issues, he sees the issues we have with the provider community. Glenwood is a regional facility. It facilitates healthcare for all of our regional markets. When they're not at full capacity or have the ability to be at full capacity, it shifts burden to St. Francis, to LSU Ochsner, and out of our market. We're on diversion more times than we're not. These things, again, are implicating our system of healthcare. And so, Dr. Abraham, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Actually, Dr. Abraham, I got a few questions for the bill's author, just to get started. Representative Eccles, tell me if you disagree with these two statements.
Sure.
This would take a radical approach to healthcare facilities like Glenwood that have REITs owning the real estate. Would you agree that this has not been done in anywhere else within the state or within the United States of America?
I know it hasn't been done in Louisiana. The intent is to target publicly traded REITs that have an operator that fails multiple times.
My question was radical approach. Answer.
I think it's a dynamic approach to hold them accountable.
Dynamic, radical. Okay. Does it prohibit Medicaid funds from being used to pay rent?
As the way the bill is written, there's a section that could implicate that, and I'd be happy to remove that section.
Okay. I think the answer to that is yes. And does it require that an operator runs short? If an operator runs short on revenues to run the hospital, the REIT has the is acting as a full financial backstop, and that includes personal liability of the REIT's officers and board of directors.
That's an accurate statement. It is in the bill.
That is your dynamic approach.
Dynamic approach. And look, as it relates to the bill, all I want is accountability from Medical Properties Trust on the asset and the operator. It doesn't matter what we put in the bill from a logistical perspective. I just want there to be accountability measures. The biggest teeth in this to me are holding their fiduciary, their board members, the ones that are responsible for financially underwriting these operators, to be held personally responsible if they allow our system to fail and fail and fail again. And again, I'm open to any suggestions that get the bill in good order.
So I own some real estate development and count a restaurant. Obviously not to the same level of importance in a community as a hospital is, but should I be personally responsible for the restaurant's success or failure as the landlord?
So we're required to have health care. We're not required to have restaurants. I think it's
and again, I said, but
Sure.
But in premise, that's what we're essentially doing here.
It is definitely a dynamic approach.
Okay. I'm viewing this, Representative Eccles, as a bill that's solely targeted at the landlord of the Glenwood Medical Center.
It is my intent to hold the one that is holding my hospital hostage responsible for not properly underwriting these folks that loot our healthcare system.
What do you think, and I've gotten into the background and you've provided, I think, your version of events, but what do you think the landlord should have done differently?
Put in a viable operator. If they had a viable operator that was not pulling out and leaving supplies not on the shelves, but I don't know where they are. I don't know where they're shuffling that around. If they would have brought in a viable tenant to operate the facility, we wouldn't have an issue. But they continue to pick bad operator after bad operator. When employees are not having their withdrawals for insurance and 401ks deposited in those accounts, that is not a viable operator.
I don't know the answer to this question. Was when the REIT took over Glenwood, was Stewart already operating at Glenwood?
That was before I was an elected official. I don't know. They can probably, their executive team, I believe, is here, and I'm sure you'll have a chance to impanel them and talk about how they acquired the asset and other questions.
So it's my understanding, too, that for many months the hospital did not pay rent.
That is accurate. So it's kind of unique.
So my question would be, how is it possible that rental payments drained, quote unquote, the hospital?
So if you look at the previous operator, they had said and attested, they said they would attest via written notice to the Department of Health and the Secretary and the legal counsel that Stewart was paying their rent payments. When I asked the legal authority at the LDH to request that proof by way of the transfers. 2 weeks later, Medical Properties Trust had to make a disclosure that Stewart had not been paying rent. And I think it was on one of their quarterly calls. That may have been in 2024. Soon after that.
That Stewart was not paying the rent.
That's correct. The current vendor, I've talked to.
Around what time was that?
I believe it was in November of 2023. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you just referenced it. The public record shows that of the Stewart bankruptcy shows that the Glenwood landlord provided hundreds of millions of dollars in cash support to keep hospitals operating. Were you aware of that?
I don't have the public records that you're referencing.
Okay.
I'm just going off of what they disclosed to the Department of Health, and I'm also going off the quarterly calls that Medical Properties Trust has reported that rent payments were not sent. And this is a national organization. This is not just Glenwood. They could pay the light bill at Glenwood.
Right. So the public records from Stewart's bankruptcy shows that this REIT infused hundreds of millions of dollars into Stewart's facilities across the country. And so I guess my question would be, what more do you think that the landlord could have done at Glenwood?
Not allow labor and delivery, not allow these hundreds of other service nons, not allow elevators to not be repaired, not allow the shelves to run dry and go into medical jeopardy 15 different times. I don't know where they squandered the money. I just know that my hospital is sitting vacant and barren and not at full capacity, and it's put pressure on my other systems.
I totally agree with you that, given what I know, that there was a failure in the ability to provide health care at Glenwood. I just strongly disagree that it is the landlord's fault and not the operator. I guess some of the concerns that I have with this, and I see that there's other questions, and I'm genuinely concerned that this is a violation of the Commerce Clause. I mean, the bill discriminates against out-of-state REITs and interferes with interstate commerce by penalizing national capital markets for local policy decisions. Has anyone brought that up?
This is the first committee that issue's been brought up.
The federal preemption under Medicaid law is another concern. Medicaid is a joint federal-state program with federal oversight. Limiting payment based on ownership structure could run afoul of CMS rules. I know you said that you would be interested in perhaps taking that out, but I mean, that's obviously a dynamic approach.
Yeah, if I was targeting what the ultimate goal is, holding the fiduciary, which is their board and their executives, responsible if they do not underwrite operators.
Yeah.
So if there are tweaks to be made to the bill, again, I'm 100%.
I guess that it brings me to my third concern I have is we're perhaps getting into an area of unconstitutional taking when you're forcing a REIT and their officers to personally guarantee operational funding without control of hospital operations. I mean, that could amount to an unconstitutional taking with due process. Do you see where I'm going with that one?
I certainly hear your comments.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to let some of the other, don't want to belabor this too long, but Senator Andrews.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm sniffling. The way I see it and look, and I've experienced with you what we've seen in this horrific situation. I do understand your contention with rent payments, because if I remember, there was a $134 million initial acquisition of this property, right?
I don't know what the acquisition cost was.
But then the rent payments, how do you know how much the rent payments were?
I do not. It's not in any publicly disclosable record. We've searched the assessor's office and the closing documents, but the way that the documents are linked together, it looks like a shell game of companies, and it doesn't disclose an actual amount. The hospital at $134 million, I mean, just at a 8% return, which I think is probably a nominal return for a REIT, you're talking a pretty good chunk of money you'd have to pay between $800 and millions of dollars a month in rent based on what the REIT's return is. But that's me speculating on REIT returns.
But we do know the issue with the operator is more of the cost of the building. like, when I say, because what you guys were talking about, why would the company who owns it have some liability in what has occurred? And when I read your bill and understand what happened in West Monroe, then it seems because of this shell game that continues to be ongoing, it seems like it sets an operator up for failure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you come in with an exorbitantly high rent on a building that is depreciated below the actual value, then yes, whoever they pick either is a sucker or partnering with them to do these things, and that doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
But the way I understood it in the West Monroe area in Glenwood was that you either find someone at their terms or the hospital closed,
That's accurate.
which then becomes a health and safety issue in the region.
We, when we had our hearing, we discussed that. And so there's a balance in the healthcare market. You know, when Mr. Turton exposed that they killed and/or maimed patients, I don't want Glenwood to shut down. I just want a viable operator or a viable owner to use the asset in the way it's intended to be used. It's because of this malfeasance that we're here today, and that if patients are getting maimed and/or hurt, what do? Do you continue to let patients get hurt, not have supplies, get stuck twice, not have urinals, not have these other things? I mean, at some point we have to measure the quality of care and say, how bad do we let it get? Because, you know, we got a big ownership group back here, and they're replacing these operators again and again and again. I just want the problem solved. At the end of the day, if they would get out of there and put in an operator that would do the right thing, I'd be the biggest cheerleader in the world. But it's not that way today.
And structurally, and that's what I'm going to, because the question was asked, why should they be liable? Structurally, when you have this type of structure, you can't really get a viable operator in. Remember, we had people interested.
Oh, absolutely. I've heard of several vendors that wanted to be interested, but the way that they set their pricing, those vendors said that they could not facilitate the monthly rental payment. So you've got a deeply depreciated asset that the liquidity has been pulled out of in some form or fashion because of either through mismanagement, and now you've got an asset that you just can't repair.
So that's the reason for me why they would be liable if they're hindering and impacting the health and welfare of our constituency. Basically, you have others who were interested who are operating hospitals very successfully, delivering great patient care, but the financial structure in this instance will not allow that to happen.
I mean, I would assume that's the case, yes.
And so for me, that's the bottom line. And I know it didn't happen in most members' districts, but, you know, I want to say this. Imagine that you had a hospital that needed to operate, and that hospital cannot find a viable operator because of the financial structure of the building itself and the ownership of the building, because that is the situation that we continuously find ourselves in. And so no other operator, even in the state of Louisiana, will when they consider and they find out the financial structure, they pull back. So in West Monroe and all over the region, because people come from all over the region to Glenwood Hospital, patient care is being jeopardized. And as I understand it, basically, people just can't afford it. It's not a good business model for an operator to enter into. It's almost like you're destined to fail. I'm not sure. And that's how, when I look at everything, and we've looked at other people being interested, when they privately disclose interest, they pull out very quickly. And that's why I think at some point, if structurally it's set up for extreme rent payments, that are going to definitely hinder the operator's ability to provide the services needed, then it creates a health and welfare and safety issue. And that is what we're seeing in Northeast Louisiana. We barely treat the number of patients we need to with the 3 hospitals. Most of the times the rooms are full, right? The only one that's not is Glenwood because of the issues we're having. Right now in North Louisiana, especially at our beloved St. Francis, who's doing all they can, and Ochsner, people in the emergency room right now for 6 and 7 days receiving hospital care. So when I look at this, Representative Echols, I look at it as a healthcare crisis in a region of the state that could be avoided. How do you look at it, Mr. Surgeon General?
No, I agree 100% with you, Senator. We've got to have Glenwood. And with echoing Representative Echols, the physicians and the employees, the nurses, the staff, they love that hospital. They do yeoman's work. They work very, very hard to stretch the limited resources that I'm told they have. And it is to your exact point, who are we going to get to come in besides what's there? But that's not working very well, I'm told, by my doctors, who I talk to quite often, because we have to send patients to St. Francis, Glenwood, everywhere, just to get them in the hospital. And your point's exactly right. Right now, I had a patient that was in another hospital there locally, 8 hours, just in the waiting room of the emergency room, and then got back and never got up on the floor, got on the gurney against the wall. And that's where they were treated for an inpatient issue that was actually very serious. So, yes, it's a crisis.
Right. And so this is not just what has happened at this hospital, and that's where I am, Mr. Surgeon General. It's not just about this hospital. It is what this hospital setup has done to the region for health care.
Yeah, it's essential that we have a viable, well-functioning Glenwood. And also to your point, Senator, St. Francis has stepped up as much and really more than they needed to. They have taken the brunt of the overflow, but they are stretched to the gills with patients, and it's a tough situation. Ochsner is doing great work for our region too, but walk into any of those hospitals any hour of the day. It could be 2 a.m. in the morning, and you're going to immediately see the crisis that you are alluding to right in front of your eyes.
And in your opinion, what is causing this?
Causing the crisis?
Right.
Just lack of access. Because I can't get a patient that, one, wants to go necessarily to Glenwood because they've heard some stories from their friends. And when I talk to my physicians, especially in the subspecialties and the specialties, they are grappling to get supplies for surgery, grappling to get supplies, just basic stuff that the patient needs on a routine basis, whether that be a urinary catheter, an IV catheter, you name it. My docs are telling me that there are days that it's very difficult to come by those basic items that we all need in a hospital setting to take care of patients.
So that's where I am. This is a very unique bill, but it's very unique because of the health and welfare crisis that's going on in our region. And it's simply based on the structure, the financial structure of how this hospital was acquired and the hindrance of even getting a viable operator under this structure. So I just believe if you're going to be an ownership business of a hospital, you have to make that hospital accessible to a viable operator. And when your structure of finances restricts that, then you're in the game at that point. You've placed yourself in the game. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Andrews. Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you're talking about the medical jeopardy that the facility was in previously, is that documented anywhere? Joint Commission do that or anything? And what were the reasons why that was documented for them to be in medical jeopardy?
Well, just under the previous administration, I believe they were placed in medical jeopardy. They were on medical jeopardy in Q1 of 2024, and then they were, is it double jeopardy, y'all's terminology? So LDH places these operators on this schedule, and if it's to a point, as I appreciate it, they can pull their hospital license, the state hospital license, if they don't figure out a way to get things back into compliance. I believe it was in March, April, or May of 2024 that they were able to shore up enough supplies to meet, and I think y'all had auditors on site for weeks at a time until they finally caught back up. But in that period, I mean, the patient care and they were reduced down to a third of their capacity from an operations perspective. But again, the department could speak to that.
All right, so Tim, how does this link directly to the Medical Properties Trust? How do they become involved with this medical jeopardy situation that the hospital gets involved in?
So they're just on the asset. The operator would have been the one that was in medical jeopardy and subject to losing their license with the state. That was and so the intent of the bill is MPT, stop putting crappy operators in the hospital and sucking money out and, wasting it.
Let me ask you this. You said something else that interested me too. You talked about the Medical Properties Trust loaning money to the operator to pay their rent back to them?
I believe Senator McMath referenced that a REIT should be, again, a separation between the two entities, lending money back in lending facilities to the operator. That's a highly irregular practice, as I appreciate it, in the REIT-based business, again, which is why I think there's SEC violations too. But I don't know.
Practical reason you would do that.
Keep the facility open.
Yeah, if you're just trying to keep the facility afloat or all the facilities afloat, if they literally were losing money and you as Medical Properties Trust went on the record and said that operators are profitable, you say that in a quarterly call, I don't have the exact date, but they're clearly not. Like, this is a major securities issue that they have with this. So to me, it's you're funneling money down to funnel it back up. It doesn't make any sense.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Senator Luno. The board is clear. We've got a few cards in support that wish to see Matt Tolbert with Town of Sterlington. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm Matt Talbert. I'm the mayor of Town of Sterlington.
Welcome to Senate Health and Welfare.
I'm sorry?
Welcome to Senate Health and Welfare.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Look, it's my first time being in health and welfare because I don't deal a lot with medical stuff.
You picked a good one.
Yeah, I did. But this hospital is very important to our town and really important to our entire region. And we have seen a backlog and people not being able to get in to get the health care they need. But for me, it goes a little beyond that. In February of 23, my mom went in that hospital with bronchitis. And 3 days later, she was feeling good, ready to go home. And they said, look, before you go home, we want to do a heart cath. And I said, well, why? And to this day, I don't know why. But she did that. A day or two later, she called, and I couldn't understand a word she was saying. So I drove up there. She didn't know who she was, where she was at. They moved her off that floor to another floor. They kept doing test after test. And the nurses there kept coming to me and saying, you need to get her out of here right now. Things are not good here. You need to get her out. Her doctor in Shreveport was calling me and saying, I want to get her over here, but she's not stable enough. If we try to move her, she'll die. March 17th, that happened. And, they come to me and they told me she was a dialysis patient. And they said, well, her dialysis quit working. As I appreciate it from her doctor, dialysis don't just quit working. She was tested monthly to see where her numbers were at. She was fine. Dialysis was working, but they came to me and said, well, it just quit working, so we don't know. So she went on hospice and passed away. So when you look back, nobody's responsible. The whoever could be responsible is just like, hey, we filed bankruptcy, we're gone, see you later. And not that I wanted to go after any of them, but there's no reason that she shouldn't be here today. Thank you.
Mayor Tolbert, we appreciate your testimony and sharing your personal story. I haven't lost a parent, so I can't imagine what that's like. But thank you for coming in here and sharing that with you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Deborah Fletcher.
Hello again. I just wanted to talk about one of the things that I've been researching quite a bit now is the corporate practice of medicine and private equity in healthcare. So what he's describing in Monroe is happening everywhere. It's become a nationwide trend that other private equity companies will buy rural hospitals because they know they're financially struggling. They'll make them unprofitable. They'll get very limited supplies, and they end up closing. And it ends up causing worse care than if they just stayed, But that's one of the things that I'm actually with the AMA and with LSMS and a number of other groups working against this. There was a bill in June 2024 with Senator Elizabeth Warren called the Corporate Crimes Against Healthcare Act that was specifically aimed against the private equity investors in healthcare, and that they need to have transparency. There are 3 states that do have some regulation in private equity investments in the healthcare setting that are New York, California, and Massachusetts. One of the most recent hospital closures is Crozier, and that was due to a private equity buyout. So this is something you really need to watch.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Good news. I actually filed a Senate concurrent resolution that memorializes Congress to take a look at the corporate practice of medicine. I think by definition, though, this REIT was not practicing medicine, although, again, I think the landlord versus somebody that's, a for-profit, publicly traded REIT is not, making calls on healthcare itself. But I hear what you're saying, and you and I, we can work together on tackling that, because I do think I agree with you. I think it's a big issue. So thank you. All right, you guys want to clear the table? Good news is we've got folks from corporate leadership of Medical Properties Trust here that can answer some questions for us. So Frederick McKinney with Medical Properties Trust, Ed Aldag with Medical Properties Trust, and let's get Mark Borman, Dr. Borman, MD? Borsman, sorry. Not going to make the normal doctor's handwriting joke. Okay.
I'm with Glenwood, just for clarity.
Okay, great.
Not with Medical Properties Trust.
We've never met.
No, we've never met.
You want to lead us off?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come speak today and to address some of the inaccuracies that I've heard from Representative Eccles and others.
All right. Will you please introduce yourself for the record?
So I'm Ed Aldag. I'm one of the co-founders and chairman, president, and CEO of Medical Properties Trust. And Senator Andrews, I'll tell you, we didn't pick any of these operators. We didn't pick Steward. We didn't pick HSA, and I'll go through that in more detail in just a moment. But let me tell you a little bit about Medical Properties Trust. So one of my co-founders, Steve Hamner, is a native of Shreveport, Louisiana, and an LSU graduate. We started the company over 2 decades ago to solve a critical problem: how to ensure that hospitals, especially those in underserved and financially fragile communities, have access to the capital they need to thrive. We're structured as a real estate investment trust. REITs were authorized by Congress in the 1960s to help individuals invest investors acquire a stake in real estate without having to buy the entire property. We must distribute 90% of our profits annually to our shareholders in the form of dividends. This is why our owners are long-term investors like pension funds, including Louisiana-based retirement funds. We're headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama, but our investments span across more than 30 states and 9 countries and more than 400 hospitals. We're proud to have included the state of Louisiana in that list for over 18 years. During that time, we've committed nearly $200 million to healthcare properties here, supporting hospitals that thousands of Louisianians depend on every day. We don't run hospitals. We don't manage patient care. We're not allowed to by law. What we do is to provide the infrastructure, the buildings, the financing, the long-term stability that makes care possible. We realize the distress that the citizens of West Monroe and the employees of Glenwood have been through and the challenges they face due to Stewart Healthcare's bankruptcy. This afternoon now, I want to provide some background on our business, our commitment to Louisiana, and to the people of West Monroe, and our efforts to work to stabilize the services at Glenwood and dispel the myths that have falsely characterized our role in Stewart's financial troubles. Medical Properties Trust is the largest hospital-focused real estate investment trust in the world. Our business model is simple and transparent. We buy hospital real estate and we lease it back to operators like Honor Health, St. Luke's, Common Spirit, Methodist, HCA, Ochsner, and many others, freeing up capital for them to reinvest in clinical services, technology, and staffing. We act as any other landlord does. We're not involved in our tenants' operations. We're not involved in the day-to-day operation of any hospital. Under both federal tax law and corporate governance rules, we're not allowed to. Over the past 2 decades, this model has proven itself to be one of the most effective ways to help hospitals modernize and remain viable. Unfortunately, House Bill 317 threatens to upend the entire model in Louisiana, putting the future of hospital care and investment in this state at serious risk. A hospital's real estate is the single biggest asset, representing roughly 80% of its total value. The cost of that real estate has to be funded somehow. For community hospitals like Glenwood, who don't have large endowments or the ability to issue bonds to finance that cost, they have limited number of options. They can borrow the funds from a bank or other financial institution, but that's usually at a higher cost and over shorter terms, and generally they can only finance roughly half the cost of the real estate value, meaning they need to have a large amount of cash to close on the loan and will be forced to refinance every 5 to 10 years. REITs, on the other hand, offer hospital operators a cost-effective alternative. Generally, when a new operator, as was the case when IASIS bought Glenwood, purchases a hospital, they can use a REIT purchasing the real estate and leasing it back to the operator as a part of the sources of funds for the acquisition of the hospital. In the case of Glenwood and almost all other properties, the lease cost as a percentage of the facility's annual revenues are low, approximately 5%, and the operator never has to pay the lease back, unlike a loan. Let me speak specifically for just a moment about our footprint in Louisiana. In total, we've invested nearly $200 million in the state. This includes major commitments in West Monroe, where Glenwood is obviously located, in Bossier City, Manville, Canal Street, New Orleans. We also previously owned facilities in Denham Springs, Covington, Hammond, Lafayette, and both supporting rural and urban health care. These investments are not short-term transactions. We are not private equity. They are long-term commitments to the communities we serve. Our goal has always been to create stability and to enable operators to focus on what they do best, delivering true health care. Perhaps nowhere is more appropriate in our approach as hospital REIT more evident than in Glenwood Medical Center in West Monroe. As you all know, Glenwood was built in 1962 and was owned by the Hospital Service District Number 1. In the 5 years, 2001 to 2006, Glenwood lost nearly $30 million. As a result, the district sold Glenwood to IASIS in 2007 for approximately $80 million. That was approved by the hospital's board, the Louisiana Attorney General, and the voters of the parish's 5th Ward, where the hospital is located. The funds were used to pay off the debt of the previous owner and to establish a Living Well Foundation with more than $40 million. MPT acquired the property from IASIS, not Steward. We acquired it in 2013. Never were any funds from MPT for the acquisition of the real estate ever paid to Steward. Over the past decade, we've invested a total of $107 million in the hospital, including nearly $20 million in capital expenditures to upgrade and maintain the facility. That money has gone into structural improvements, life safety upgrades, and ensuring that the building is equipped for modern medical use. Steward acquired all of IASIS, including all of their hospitals, which included Glenwood, in 2017. We did not pick Steward. We inherited Steward. MPT actually lowered the rental rate due to additional collateral that Steward brought to the table. It's been suggested by some that Steward's downfall and the challenges at Glenwood were triggered by high rent charges that financially stressed the hospital's operating budget. This is a wildly inaccurate mischaracterization of our operating model and ignores the prudent steps we take to determine what a hospital's rent should be. MPT, like other REITs, use a detailed underwriting process that looks at what essentially is the facility's operating cash flow as an indicator. Our standard for acute care hospitals is 2 times operating cash flow above rent. What does this mean? Simply put, it's a conservative financial underwriting standard that requires a hospital or healthcare facility to generate twice as much sustainable cash flow as it pays in annual rent. To put this in perspective, nursing home REITs generally underwrite to a much lower standard of 1.2 times. We don't own any nursing homes. For the 8 years pre-COVID, under both IASIS and Steward, Glenwood's operating cash flow averaged 3.6 times cash flow above the rent. This data conclusively shows that rent was never a financial issue under IASIS or Steward. Steward stopped paying MPT rent after September 2023 due to its parent company's cash issues. This was months before it declared bankruptcy. Its cash flow problems at the time of bankruptcy filing were not caused by rent they were paying. When Steward ran into financial difficulties and ultimately filed bankruptcy in 2024, MPT didn't pull back from Glenwood. We stepped in. In fact, we facilitated more than $500 million in liquidity for the entire Steward system to remain operational. At Glenwood alone, we provided $26 million in working capital loans, forgave Steward $10 million in rent, kept the hospital operations open during this crisis, and it enabled Glenwood to fund payroll for its employees who otherwise would have gone without payment due to Steward's financial problems. In fact, we also directly provided the Steward estate the last 3 weeks of Steward's ownership for employee salary and wages, which otherwise would not have been paid. We also deferred $6 million in rent to Glenwood's new operator to ensure a smooth transaction. In fact, MPT was the only entity to bring cash to the table during this stressful period to maintain services at Glenwood. Providing short-term loans and rent deferrals is not uncommon in the REIT model. REITs often provide such flexibility during and after times of unforeseen financial distress. We worked tirelessly with the bankruptcy court as the court and the debtors involved sought new operators. MPT was precluded from that process. Ultimately, the court selected American Health Systems through a competitive bid process, not MPT. American Health Systems, now known as HCA.
Can you repeat that one more time just for, I want to make sure everybody understood that. So you didn't choose Stewart and the court chose the current operator?
We were precluded from the entire replacement of tenant process during the first 9 months of the Steward bankruptcy process. There was a competitive bid process. AHS, another entity, maybe more, could put in a bid. The courts, the bankruptcy court, chose who the operator was going to be.
And just to be clear, the author of this bill has said that his sole purpose of this bill is to ensure that MPT doesn't continue to choose bad operators, when in fact you haven't chosen any of the operators in this. Is that correct?
That is correct. We inherited Steward when they bought all
I think
of
we
IASIS.
have. I think your testimony has been great. I think we've got a few questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Senator Andrews.
Good morning. Are you a significant financer of HSA today? Are you a significant financer of HSA?
HSA is the operator in several of the former Steward hospitals. Other than just providing working capital funds during the transition period, no. We own no part
But you do
of.
provide, I didn't say you owned it, I said significant financer. So tell me about your financing of HSA.
We provided working capital loans to all of the Steward replacement operators because we had 3 weeks from the time that the court took the hospitals back from Steward and leased them to these new operators. So there wasn't a whole lot of time for them to go out and get ABL loans, asset-backed loans, which is typically what hospital operators do. So MPT provided those loans.
Okay. And then Steward had purchased the hospital a few years before you for $134 million.
So Steward didn't buy Glenwood. They bought all of IASIS, which included Glenwood.
Right.
I don't know what their allocation was for Glenwood. We paid approximately $80 million for the hospital when IASIS owned it, which is what IASIS paid the district for it back in 2008 or 9, whenever it was.
So what was the $1.2 billion purchase price in 2016 for Steward Massachusetts transaction? That's the one I'm talking about, the Steward Massachusetts transaction.
When we bought those hospitals, those were hospitals in Massachusetts. There were
Right.
eight hospitals that
And-
we bought from Steward.
Right, and they had purchased them for $134 million a few years before you purchased them for $1.2 billion. What?
Well, those hospitals were part of a Catholic organization that was on the verge of bankruptcy. Steward and their private equity firm came in long before MPT was involved and bought those hospitals out of financial distress and turned those hospitals around. They invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a public document that Steward's private equity partner talks about the amount of money that they put in.
And I guess that's my questioning financially. It's like almost an intentional paying of a lot more than the value to acquire.
Well, that's not true at all. You remember I told you just a few minutes ago how we do our underwriting. So when we look at our underwriting, we like to see that there's at least a 2 times cash flow. We obviously look at what the value of the buildings are as well, but it's a 3-stage process. So first we look at it from a financial underwriting. We then look at it from, okay, what would it cost to replace these particular facilities? And that's obviously different in Massachusetts than it would be in Glenwood.
Okay. And then through the bankruptcy, because we've talked a lot about bankruptcy, did you refuse to sell to other operators who bid on the asset below their price?
Remember that during the bankruptcy process, the debtors and the bankruptcy court were totally in charge of that process until approximately very late August of 2024, in which case the bankruptcy court asked us if we would take our properties back and allow the leases to be terminated with Steward.
Right. But there were times that you were asked about selling the property.
No. So the only facilities that came up during the time period, I think there was one in Hope, Arkansas, which we ultimately gave to the city of Hope. There was Orlando Health purchased some facilities down on what we refer to as the Space Coast area, and we consented with all of those.
Oh, I forgot I had to handle a bill. I'm not finished, but I left a bill on the calendar in here, just FYI. So the SEC filings show MPT's top 3 executives earned $125 million in cash and equity from 2019 to 2022. How much of this compensation was tied to acquisition volume or inflated asset value?
Well, they weren't inflated asset values, but if you look at our proxy statement, which goes through in great detail how all of the executives at MPT are compensated, we're all compensated with a base salary, and then we're all compensated with bonuses that are paid in both, as you stated, equity and in cash. And it's different metrics every year. It's not the same thing every year, depending on what the goals of the board are.
Is the acquisition
so some
value?
of it isn't in the acquisition, the amount of acquisitions, but it's also in what the what the cash operations are from those acquisitions.
Okay, and so MPT has made equity investments in several operators while also acting as their landlords. Does this dual role violate IRS rules, particularly the 9.9% ownership threshold?
No, it doesn't. So prior to 2009, January 2009, hospital REITs could not own any part of their tenants. Post that time period, there were two different mechanisms for doing it. One is you could do what's called a RIDEA transaction, in which case you could actually own 100% of your operator. Most of the other healthcare REITs actually do that, but most of them are nursing home operators. We've never used a RIDEA structure. We have done equity investments where we own anything less than 9.9%. That's the limitation. In every one of those instances, we are merely an investor like you would be if you owned a stock. We have no board position. We have no management of the company. Have no ability to manage the company.
But you're staying under the 9.9% threshold?
Yes.
Okay. So why has MPT issued direct loans to operators and then acquired the same real estate used as collateral, often in a rapid succession?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to because we haven't. Maybe what you're referring to is in Utah, we did two loan mortgage transactions. Now, for a REIT, a mortgage isn't as good as actually owning the real estate. So if you have a mortgage, then you're subject to bankruptcy and having that mortgage clawed back or having your principal called back. A lease is worth a lot more from that standpoint. So when we did the Utah transaction with Steward, we did several of them in a lease transaction, and then we did the others in a mortgage for tax purposes for Steward. We then later bought those properties at their real value and paid off the mortgages.
Did you select Steward in that transaction? I know you've testified that you didn't select Steward in our transaction, but you seem to have had some, transactions with Steward outside of this.
Yeah, Steward was our largest operator. Steward first came to us when long after they had bought the Massachusetts facilities and revamped those facilities. So that's how we met them, is through that transaction.
So, you've testified that you didn't select them here, but how many times have you done business with Steward in other places?
I don't remember the exact number of hospitals that we owned, but I think it was approximately 32 times.
So when you came here, Steward wasn't someone or a company you were unfamiliar with?
That's correct.
Had Steward ever defaulted on payments with you in other transactions?
Oh, yeah. Well, they defaulted in 23 when they stopped paying rent.
No, I understand Glenwood. I'm saying.
Well, that was everything. They stopped paying rent on everything.
Everything.
Yes.
Right. Had you had payment issues from Steward before you came into the arrangement with Glenwood?
No. So we never had payment issues with Steward until they filed bankruptcy, or right before they filed bankruptcy, I should say.
And so, and that's the confusion we're having when we're looking at the historical value, not just in Glenwood, but everywhere with your relationship with Steward, is that it seems that there's some type of conflict of interest, kind of shell game of finances going on. You finance up front, and then later on you acquire property. It just, and that's where, for me, when we're looking at what has happened in Glenwood, the close connectivity you've had with Steward, where there just seems to be some type of conflict of interest or concealing of some type of financial cycle that's starting to be more apparent.
So Senator, with all due respect, that just isn't true at all. We're, as Representative Echols points out, we're a securities filing firm, and everything that we've ever done is fully disclosed. But more importantly, where Glenwood is concerned, if you go back and look at that transaction, IASIS bought that hospital for $80 million from the district. We then bought that hospital or funded that hospital for $80 million when we did the sale leaseback with IASIS. They had to get that financing from somewhere. So if they didn't get it from us, they could have gotten it from Bank of America, or from Chase, from Origin, or whomever. But it would have had to come from somewhere.
Were they not able to go to a bank and get financed?
Yeah, no, absolutely. ISIS was a very big company, but our financing is generally much better financing than a bank financing. For the most part, is that they never have to pay it back.
And I'm just getting clarity because it's been so much. Have you, when the bankruptcy proceeding was going on, did you refuse to restructure lease rates during that bankruptcy proceeding?
No, all of the lease rates were restructured.
Okay, at what point during the bankruptcy proceeding?
Well, I don't remember the exact time frame, but remember, we weren't in control of the bankruptcy proceeding standpoint, so it was a very long process.
Okay. And at any time, did MPT demand payments using payment of rent using the emergency funds like COVID relief dollars?
No.
Did you ever demand payments from that
No.
for rent?
No. Look,
Okay.
that money went to the operator. We never saw the separation of that money from anywhere. So it was revenue from the operator standpoint. So during COVID, during 2020, when all hospitals were shut down, their obviously only source of revenue were from the government funding.
But you never specifically asked them to pay you out of the government funding, COVID relief funding?
Well, I want to be clear that we're not trying to get into a trap here. We never specifically asked them to pay us out of COVID funding. They had a rent obligation to pay us. They had revenue from the COVID funding to pay it, and they paid it. Not just Stewart, but everybody.
Okay, so do you accept any responsibility for the collapse of operators like Stewart, Prospect, and Glenwood's prior lease, especially when MPT handpicked or endorsed many of them during the leaseback transactions?
No, we certainly don't have any responsibility for the operations that failed at Stewart or the operations that failed at Prospect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Eccles. Excuse me, Senator Andrews. Excuse me. Senator Presley for a question.
Mr. Oudig, I appreciate you coming to Baton Rouge and to the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. As you can see, it's an important issue to my colleagues that are from Northeast Louisiana, and making sure that we do whatever we can to ensure that healthcare is getting to the people of Louisiana, particularly in that region of the state. So I really appreciate you coming and answering some questions. I'm going to attempt to keep it brief so that we can roll out of here. But I wanted to follow up on a couple things that you said. One, you said that you were precluded for the first 9 months from making a determination on who the operator was. I believe that's because it was in bankruptcy at the time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And was there a contract that outlasted that bankruptcy, or did you have the opportunity after the bankruptcy to make a move on who the operator would be?
So it was still in bankruptcy, but because we weren't involved, I had never been to the bankruptcy court nor met any of the bankruptcy judges. I got a call in late August asking me to come down and meet with one of the bankruptcy judges. Bankruptcy was in Houston. So I went down on a Monday morning and met with Judge Isger, one of the bankruptcy judges on that court. Went back in his chamber. He said, look, I've been on the bench for 40 years and I've never seen a process work as poorly as this one. We need to save patient care. How do we do this? Previously, the lawyers for the Stewart estate had filed a motion to allow them to terminate our lease, quit paying rent, not pay rent, and maintain occupancy. That just doesn't work in bankruptcy, as you may or may not know. He said, what can we do to release these hospitals? I said, I'll tell you what, we won't fight the termination of the lease. We'll let it be terminated. Just take our hospitals back and get full control of them so that we can find replacement operators. He said, you got, I asked for 4 weeks, he gave us 3 weeks. So that September the 11th was when all of the new operators changed over. The estate for Stewart had hired several outfits, Kane Brothers being one, a couple of other outfits, I can't remember their names right now, to try to market those hospitals.
So after the 9 months, you had the opportunity to look at the operating companies. Is that that accurate?
Had 3 weeks to
3 weeks
basically
to
pull
select
the
an
ones,
operating.
to pull the ones that they've been working with to try to get them in.
And what due diligence during that 3-week period was completed by y'all?
Well, trying to think if there's any operator. There's a couple of operators we had never done business with. Honor Health one in Arizona. That was a fairly easy one. If they're not AAA, they're AA or something like that. So that the due diligence on that one was fairly easy. Quorum Health was another one that took over some Texas hospitals. We knew Quorum, we knew their owners, we knew the CEO. We had never done any business with them. HSA, formerly known as AHS, while we had never done any business with them, or while they had owned hospitals, they came to us and tried to get us to buy. For whatever reason, we didn't, but we knew them from their prior lives at other hospital operators. I'm trying to think. I'm leaving somebody out, but I can't think. So it's a small industry. We knew most everybody.
So your due diligence was really the knowledge of personal experience with executives or with the companies themselves.
That's correct.
Okay. As far as the security aspects that Representative Eccles brought up in the building, do y'all provide any security? Is there any effort there?
Yeah, so no, so the operator, it's a triple net lease triple net lease, and so the operator's responsible for everything.
all of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to reiterate, this hospital performed very well during our entire ownership of this hospital building until just past COVID with Stewart.
Representative Eccles brought up some shuffling of executives. Are you aware of that? What's your response to that?
I am not.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate you answering the questions. And look, again, I think I kind of view Representative Eccles' bill as a come see me bill. I think this is a serious issue. I think that we've got to address healthcare in the state, and I appreciate the investment in the state of Louisiana. So anything that you can do to help make that possible, I think is going to be desperately needed as we look forward over the next few years.
Well, look, the bankruptcy was painful for all of us. We just lost money. We understand the health care for West Monroe, which is why we've invested tens of millions of dollars to help hospital operators like HSA get through this period.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Presley. Senator Hodges?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question. So what do you guys see how you can address Rep. Eccles' problems and issues that are there?
Yeah.
What are you planning to do?
So I'm sorry, I don't even know your name, but I'll let you address it from a hospital operator standpoint. But there is a point that I want to point out that Representative Eccles may not be aware of. So after September the 11th until very recently, all of the replacement operators were on what's called a transition services agreement, a TSA, where they still had to transaction with the Stewart estate. Stewart doesn't exist anymore, but with the Stewart estate for electronic medical records, for billing, for cash collections. There has been a lot of fighting with between the replacement operators and what's formerly known as Stewart. There are allegations that they didn't get all of the cash that they were supposed to get. There's one hospital in Ohio that is currently operated by an operator named Insight that claims that the leftover Stewart were holding $30 million of their cash flow. So that's a serious issue to try to run a hospital when you don't have that cash flow coming in. So to answer some of the issues that may be with the supplies. It is my understanding that all of those operators, including HSA, are now off of that transition services agreement, are now doing their own cash collections, their own revenue billing, and I think that will go a long way very quickly to seeing the issues of shortness in supplies.
Okay. Well, when Rep. Eccles comes to the table, I'm going to just talk to him. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hodges. All right. Appreciate your testimony and your time today. Thank you very much. The board is clear. There are a few more red cards, and you can vacate the table. A few more red cards that are in opposition that I'll read out. Doreen Brasso with Medical Properties Trust, Beverly Haydell with Medical Properties Trust, Larry Rice with MPT, Pat Robinson with Lobby, Cliff Waddell with LHA, Meredith Miller with Glenwood Regional Medical Center, and Sandra Gross with Glenwood Regional Medical Center. Representative Eccles, would you like to, we might have a question.
I think
from-
Rep. Hodges had, or Senator Hodges had a question.
Senator Hodges?
Just trying to decide how I'm going to vote on this bill. So you heard their answer, what they're planning to do to correct this. What do you see? Do you think that could be an answer?
No. They could have done this long time ago. When I listen to their answers, I find it kind of novel. Nobody knows anybody. Nothing ever happened. They're completely void of responsibility in the situations. Although they have funneled hundreds of millions of dollars to previous partners, although they've had opportunities through the bankruptcy process to solve this issue with other vendors. Again, I think it's a smoke and screen that we're seeing up here, and I think that we have to have some tool in the tool chest. What I'm committed to you, Senator, and I'll work with you and Senator Presley and Boudreaux and McMath and Andrews to amend this bill to be appropriate, not to violate the things that Senator McMath had suggested might be a problem with the bill, but we need teeth. We cannot continue to have our regional healthcare leaders looted, unoperable, patients getting hurt, and I don't think having an extra tool in the tool chest will hurt that. They wouldn't be up here, have flown in from New York at the REIT conference trying to raise money if there wasn't a perceived issue. And again, I'm willing to solve the issues that Senator McMath brought up, but we got to hold these folks accountable. You cannot loot our healthcare system and get away with that. There's hundreds of millions of dollars, but more importantly, there are lives at stake. And that's why I brought this legislation.
So have you previously tried to talk to any of the gentlemen who were at the table?
No, I've never seen them in my life. I've only seen them on paper and that context. The people that I've talked to were the operators that said Medical Properties Trust, we're going to come in and solve this problem for them. Let me go back to my notes. And I can only go by the relationships they say they don't have, but they do have, because they've talked to them, they told me they did. Michael Saran, the CEO of American Healthcare System, Facile Gill, General Counsel, and some other executive, again, stating that they talked to a Medical Properties Trust and they would solve their $40+ million of deferred maintenance issues within the facility. I can only go by what the people I've talked to. The people at Steward told me that they were going to fix the problem in October of 2022 because the hospital was in some dire strait. We had a call with our delegation, Pat Moore, myself, I think Jay Morris, and 4 or 5 other representatives and senators at the time. They said they were going to make substantial changes because of the systems and services that were being shut down. That was in October of, it's either 22 or 23. 4 months later, all the stuff they promised, hogwash. They never did it. And now they're bankrupt, and they're gone. And they're leaving us with a blighted healthcare asset because of the relationship between those hotshots back there funneling hundreds of millions of dollars and not fixing it. You go to that hospital, elevators are broken. The tens of millions they said they funneled in the hospital, that's a joke. I got great doctors, great nurses, and healthcare providers that are trying to hold it together on the front lines. They're getting screwed, and that is not right.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Hodges. Representative Eccles, it's 1:21 when you want to reference that clip.
Which one?
Your speech.
I've done this before. I did it at the Health and Welfare Committee in the Senate in the U.S. Congress. So this is a sincere effort. This isn't some political ploy. I'm pissed because I've got patients that are getting hurt. That is not
Yes,
right.
let me ask you a question. You said that Senator Hodges had asked if you were meeting with or had met with this team. Has MPT ever reached out or offered to sit with you or their
Yes.
representative?
Beverly Haydell, their chief lobbyist team, texted me and said, would you like to meet with MPT? They're flying in, I guess, their executive team. I said, absolutely not. I've got a bill that I'm running. If they're nervous about the bill, yeah, they're going to show up. I don't care to meet with them. They've got a dilapidated hospital asset that they have not fixed. Fix the asset. I'll meet with you then to help you operate it.
The purpose of the bill, though, is to ensure that MPT, like as using your words, not mine, chooses better operators, but yet you didn't want to take the time to meet with them.
They had 2 years to solve this problem. I've repeatedly, I've had oversight hearings. They didn't show up for that one. They sent an attorney for an affiliate organization that wouldn't come down and testify. We're 2 years too late. They got an asset with a third of the doctors. We got to fix this.
Yeah. And listen, Representative, I appreciate you and Senator Andrews obviously wanting to ensure that your communities receive quality care and fighting for that. My concerns with this bill is it's going to, I feel like we're pointing the blame at the wrong operator here, or not even the operator, the landlord, and this message that this bill could send, this chilling effect that this could have on certain investments in our healthcare infrastructure is going to send a chilling effect in Louisiana, and it's going to send a message that Louisiana isn't open for investment. So that is why I'll be opposing the bill. But I do appreciate your spirit of what you're trying to do and who you're trying to fight for.
Thank you,
Senator Hodges.
Just one more thing. Thank
Yep, go for it.
you. Just real quick, there are concerns with the bill and how unintended consequences, I guess you could say. And what I want to say while the gentlemen are here, that if we don't pass this bill, we need a commitment from them that they are going to do something, because you can come back next year with a stronger bill, and that way publicly, we have public testimony that they're doing their job, and so next year we can see, and I know you don't want to wait a year, but if this bill needs work, and I share the concerns of the chairman, and I believe that's a problem, but we are serious about protecting our people. They need that. We pay for that. We pay, those are taxpayer dollars that are going to this, and it's people's lives, and I applaud you, and I know your heart for people and to do the right thing, and you're a man of integrity and honor, and I applaud you for bringing this bill. So I just want to say that basically there's something needs to be done. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hodges. Senator Andrews?
Representative Elkos has agreed that if we allow the bill to the floor, that he'll work on everyone's concerns. We really don't have a year right now. Even the Surgeon General told all of us the issues that are happening right now in the northeast region of the state with health care. I trust that he will not move the bill without addressing those concerns, but I just want to plead to the committee that we don't have a year. We don't in our region.
Senator, I would tend to agree. If we wait a year and another patient, like Mayor Talbert's mother, the people that have passed away waiting to get into an emergency room, the people that aren't getting the appropriate supplies to get the right procedures, we cannot wait. We've been 2 years plus in this disaster. And I am 100% committed, as I've given my word on many times with you on bills that we've shared author interest in, and Senator Presley, that I'll fix with your consent to keep this process moving along, but we don't have a year.
All right, the board is clear.
Report favorable.
So we have a motion by Senator Andrews to report House Bill 317 favorable. I'm going to object to that motion. Madam Secretary, please call the roll. A yes vote is to report 317 favorable. No is to keep it in committee. No.
Sorry, Chairman McMath?
No.
No. Vice Chair Jackson Andrews?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Boudreaux? No. No. Senator Cloud? Senator Hinskins? Senator Hodges? No. Senator Luno? Senator Owen? Senator Presley? No. No. We have 4 noes and 1 yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Senators.
Thank you, Representative. We have, you want to do Representative Fisher's when we meet? This committee's meeting again on Sunday at 2 o'clock. So we'll roll Representative Fisher's bill over to then. We've got do we need to adopt the minutes?